On the night of October 22, 1947, several thousand armed tribesmen crossed into the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir from the northwest, moving fast down the road toward Srinagar. The ruler of the largest princely state in British India suddenly had days, not years, to decide what his kingdom would become. His name was Hari Singh. He was the last Maharaja of a Hindu royal house that had governed a Muslim-majority Himalayan territory for 101 years, and within 2 weeks he would sign away his throne, flee his own capital, and begin a slow, mostly forgotten slide into political irrelevance. What happened to him afterward, to his son, to his grandson, and to the palaces his family once ruled from, says almost as much about the unresolved status of Kashmir today as it does about the man himself. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. To understand how one family came to own an entire mountain kingdom, you have to go back almost exactly a century earlier to a treaty signed in a British cantonment town and a price tag that still startles historians. In 1846, after Britain defeated the Sikh Empire in the First Anglo-Sikh War, a Dogra nobleman named Gulab Singh bought the Kashmir Valley outright from the East India Company for 75 lakh rupees, close to 7.5 million rupees of the period, under the Treaty of Amritsar. A kingdom of extraordinary beauty, home to Kashmiri Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs, had effectively changed hands like a shipment of goods. Gulab Singh ruled for 11 years, and after his death in 1857, his son Ranbir Singh expanded the kingdom further, pushing Dogra control into Gilgit, Hunza, and other remote mountain districts, and commissioning a legal code that carried his name for generations afterward. Ranbir Singh's son Pratap Singh took the throne in 1885, but his reign was troubled almost from the start. British officials, anxious about Russian influence creeping down from Central Asia during what came to be called the Great Game, accused Pratap Singh of secret dealings with Russia and stripped him of much of his authority, placing a British-controlled council above him for years. Pratap Singh had no sons. When he died in 1925, the throne passed to his nephew, a 30-year-old man named Hari Singh, who had been educated in England and trained at the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. Hari Singh became Maharaja of a state that looked, on paper, like one of the great success stories of princely India. Jammu and Kashmir was the largest of all the princely states, stretching from the Kashmir Valley through Jammu and up into Ladakh and the high passes bordering Central Asia. But the kingdom carried a structural tension that never went away. Its ruling family and much of its land-owning elite were Hindu, while the overwhelming majority of its subjects, particularly in the Kashmir Valley itself, were Muslim. Resentment over land revenue, forced labor, and political exclusion had been building for years, and in 1931 it broke into open unrest. With protests and riots, the state answered with force. A British-appointed commission later documented widespread grievances among Kashmiri Muslims. Out of that unrest rose a young political leader named Sheikh Abdullah, whose movement, the National Conference, would eventually decide Hari Singh's fate more than any single tribal invasion could. When the British Empire in India began dividing into two independent nations in the summer of 1947, every princely ruler faced the same choice: accede to India, accede to Pakistan, or attempt to remain independent. Hari Singh wanted the third option. Jammu and Kashmir bordered both new countries, its population was majority Muslim, and its ruler was Hindu, which made the state a symbolic prize for each side and an impossible position for Hari Singh to hold neutrally. He signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan to preserve trade and postal links, while deferring any similar arrangement with India and hoping the pressure on him would simply pass. It did not. Pakistan grew frustrated with the delay and suspicious that Hari Singh intended to accede to India quietly and began applying pressure of its own. That pressure arrived fast. It arrived as the tribal invasion of October 1947, an armed incursion of Pashtun fighters from the northwest frontier, reportedly encouraged and supplied by elements within Pakistan, who moved towards Srinagar looting and burning as they came. Hari Singh's small state force could not stop them. With the invaders closing in on his capital, Hari Singh appealed to India for military help, and India's government, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, agreed on one condition: legal accession first. On October 26, 1947, Hari Singh signed the Instrument of Accession, formally joining Jammu and Kashmir to the Indian Union. Indian troops were airlifted into Srinagar the following morning, arriving just in time to push the tribal fighters back from the outskirts of the city. The kingdom his family had purchased a century earlier was now, legally, no longer his to rule alone. The defense of Srinagar in the last days of October 1947 came down to a matter of hours. Indian troops of the 1st Sikh Regiment were flown into the city's airfield aboard a fleet of civilian Dakota aircraft requisitioned almost overnight, landing while fighting was still audible from the outskirts, and immediately moved to hold the perimeter before the tribal force could reach the city center. Kashmir's own state forces, the small army Hari Singh's family had maintained for generations, fought alongside the newly arrived Indian units in the opening battles around Baramulla and Uri, suffering heavy losses against a much larger irregular force armed partly with weapons that had crossed the border from Pakistan's own military stores. Within weeks, the fighting settled into the kind of static, mountainous stalemate that would come to define the region for the rest of the century. Hari Singh, watching from Jammu, had signed his kingdom into a war he had spent months trying to avoid entirely. The accession saved the kingdom from Pakistani control, but it did not save Hari Singh's throne. Nehru had never fully trusted the Dogra ruler, and the price of Indian military support included handing day-to-day administration to Sheikh Abdullah, the very political leader whose movement had spent the previous decade agitating against the Maharaja's rule. Abdullah was installed as head of an emergency administration within days of the accession and became the state's first prime minister the following spring. Hari Singh remained, in name, the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, but the real authority in his own kingdom now belonged to a man his government had once imprisoned. Relations between the two soured quickly, and by 1949, with Nehru's quiet backing, Abdullah pushed for Hari Singh's removal from Kashmir altogether. In June of 1949, Hari Singh left Jammu and Kashmir and did not return to govern it again. His 18-year-old son, Karan Singh, was installed as regent, officially titled the Yuvraj, to represent the family's continuing constitutional role while the actual business of running the state passed further from Dogra hands with every passing month. Hari Singh settled in Bombay, far from the mountains his family had ruled for 4 generations, and lived there in a kind of quiet, comfortable exile, watching from a distance as the kingdom he had signed away slipped fully out of his family's control, piece by piece. In 1952, under an agreement between the state government and New Delhi, hereditary rule in Jammu and Kashmir was formally abolished. Karan Singh, still in his 20s, was elected by the state legislature to a newly created position, Sadar-e-Riyasat, or head of state, replacing the title of Maharaja for good. Hari Singh spent his final years largely outside public life. He kept his title in a personal, ceremonial sense, but he held no political power and made few public statements about the state he had once ruled outright. He died in Bombay on April 26, 1961, at the age of 65, a monarch who had lost his throne not to revolution or war, but to the slow bureaucratic machinery of a new nation, absorbing an old kingdom. His remains were eventually brought back to Jammu, the winter capital he had once ruled from, where his family held the final rites. There was no state funeral of the kind Brazil eventually gave Pedro II or Japan gave its last shogun. Kashmir in 1961 had no throne left to mourn from. His son Karan Singh, meanwhile, was only getting started. He held the position of Sadar-e-Riyasat until 1965, when further constitutional changes folded Jammu and Kashmir more tightly into the structure of the rest of India, replacing the title Sadar-e-Riyasat with an ordinary governor and the title Prime Minister with Chief Minister, bringing the state's institutions in line with every other Indian state. Karan Singh became the first governor of Jammu and Kashmir under the new arrangement, serving until 1967. From there, rather than retreating into the private life his father had chosen, Karan Singh moved directly into national politics, joining the Indian National Congress and winning election to the Lok Sabha, India's lower house of parliament, from Udhampur. Over the following decades, Karan Singh held some of the most visible posts in Indian public life. He served as a union cabinet minister under Indira Gandhi, holding portfolios that included tourism and civil aviation, health and family planning, and education. He represented Jammu and Kashmir in the Rajya Sabha, India's upper house, for years afterward, and in 1989 he was appointed India's ambassador to the United States. Away from politics, Karan Singh built a second identity as a scholar of Hindu philosophy and Sanskrit literature, publishing books on the subject and eventually becoming the founding chairman of the Auroville Foundation, the international community established in southern India around the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. He also became a prominent voice for wildlife conservation, chairing bodies devoted to protecting India's forests and endangered species, a long way from the palace intrigue that had once decided his family's fate. Karan Singh's own family life unfolded largely outside the political spotlight that followed him everywhere else. He married Yasho Raja Lakshmi from another princely family with roots in the Kashmir region, and the couple raised 4 children together, including Vikramaditya, the son who would eventually carry the family's political name into a 3rd generation. Karan Singh's wife accompanied him through his postings as Sadar-e-Riyasat, National Cabinet Minister, and later ambassador in Washington. Adapting across each version of public life the family found itself occupying after the monarchy ended. Photographs from the period show a household that looked, on the surface, like any senior Indian political family of the era, with little visible trace of the ceremonial world Karan Singh had briefly inhabited as a teenage regent standing in for a father who had already, in every practical sense, stopped ruling. The physical world Hari Singh's family once ruled from is still standing, even if the family no longer rules from it. Hari Niwas Palace in Jammu, built in the 1930s as a royal residence, now operates as a heritage hotel, its guest rooms carrying names and furnishings meant to evoke the family's vanished court. Amar Mahal Palace, a red sandstone building modeled loosely on a French chateau and completed in the early 20th century, has been converted into a museum run by a charitable trust that Karan Singh himself established. Visitors today can walk through rooms that once held Dogra state business and see, among other objects on display, a solid gold throne once used for ceremonial occasions, a relic of a kingdom that no longer exists in the form it once did. Karan Singh has spent much of his later life defending, and at times complicating, his family's legacy. In his 1982 autobiography, titled Heir Apparent, he wrote candidly about his father's hesitation in 1947 and about the political marginalization that followed the accession, describing a family that had signed away sovereignty to save a kingdom and then watched the kingdom absorbed so completely that even the family's ceremonial role eventually disappeared. He has also spoken, over the decades, about the unresolved plebiscite that early United Nations resolutions once promised the people of Kashmir, a vote on the territory's final status that neither India nor Pakistan ever allowed to take place. The accession his father signed in 1947 was meant, on paper, to be provisional. Nearly 8 decades later, it still has never been formally tested by the population it was supposed to represent. The family's political line did not end with Karan Singh. His son, Vikramaditya Singh, born in 1969, followed his father into the Indian National Congress and built his own career representing the Nagrota constituency in the Jammu and Kashmir State Assembly. Vikramaditya has held ministerial portfolios covering public works and health in state governments formed through coalition politics, and in 2023 he became president of the Jammu and Kashmir Pradesh Congress Committee, effectively the party's top position in the region. 3 generations removed from the last Maharaja who signed away the throne, a descendant of the Dogra dynasty was still standing for elected office in the very territory his family once ruled by birthright. And then, in August of 2019, the state itself effectively stopped existing in the form Hari Singh had once ruled. The Indian government revoked Article 370 of the Constitution, the provision that had granted Jammu and Kashmir a special semi-autonomous status ever since the original accession, and reorganized the territory into 2 separate union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, each administered more directly from New Delhi than any state in the Indian Union. The move was intensely controversial, defended by supporters as full integration long overdue, and condemned by critics as the final dismantling of an autonomy the accession itself had promised to preserve. Whatever the merits of either argument, the practical result was plain. The political entity Hari Singh had signed into the Indian Union in 1947 no longer existed on any map. For a family that once held a Himalayan kingdom by purchase and later gave it up by treaty, that erasure carries a particular weight. The palaces still stand. The golden throne still sits under museum glass in Jammu. But the state itself, the very thing Gulab Singh bought in 1846 and Hari Singh signed away in 1947, has been redrawn off the map by the same government his family once negotiated with as something close to an equal. That is a strange kind of erasure for a family whose name is still stamped across palace walls and museum placards across Jammu today. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The accession Hari Singh signed did not end the fighting. It started a war. Indian and Pakistani forces clashed across Kashmir through the winter of 1947 and into 1948, and when a United Nations brokered ceasefire finally took hold in January of 1949, it left the former kingdom divided by a line of control rather than reunited under any single flag. Roughly a third of the old princely state ended up under Pakistani administration, organized eventually as Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, while the larger remainder, including the Kashmir Valley and Jammu, stayed with India. The two countries fought over the same territory again in 1965, and Kashmir remained a flashpoint through the Kargil conflict of 1999 and the armed insurgency that has simmered in the valley since the late 1980s. The kingdom Gulab Singh purchased for 75 lakh rupees became, within a single generation of his descendants losing it, one of the most fought-over strips of land on the planet. Unlike Brazil, where millions of voters cast ballots in a 1993 plebiscite on restoring the monarchy, there has never been a serious movement in Jammu and Kashmir to restore the Dogra throne. Karan Singh never called for one. Neither has his son. The family's authority, once absolute, was tied so completely to the old princely state structure that once the structure itself was absorbed into a modern parliamentary republic, there was no institution left to restore. What replaced the monarchy was not simply a different government, it was an entirely different relationship between ruler and ruled, one where the family that used to issue orders now had to campaign for votes like anyone else. Very few of India's roughly 565 former princely families managed the transition from absolute ruler to functioning national politician as completely as the Dogras did through Karan Singh, and fewer still managed it while their former kingdom remained one of the most contested territories on earth. He continued writing well into old age, publishing further volumes of memoir and philosophy, and remained a fixture of Indian public life long after most of his generation of princely rulers and their heirs had faded from view. Vikramaditya Singh's position today carries its own layer of irony. He leads the Congress Party's operation in a territory where the very fact of his family's Hindu, Jammu-based identity was once the fault line that cost his great-grandfather the throne. He has had to build a political career in a landscape where the old Dogra versus Kashmiri Muslim tension that defined 1931 has never fully disappeared, only changed shape, folded now into decades of dispute over autonomy, representation, and the region's relationship with the rest of India. He is, in a literal sense, still doing the work his family was never able to finish as monarchs, trying to hold together a constituency that was never entirely united behind Dogra rule in the first place, except now through elections rather than through inheritance. Inside Amar Mahal today, visitors can see portraits of every Dogra ruler going back to Gulab Singh, hung in a gallery that traces the family's rise from regional strongman to sovereign monarch, to, eventually, ordinary Indian citizens with an unusually well-documented family tree. The palace library, built up over generations, holds thousands of rare manuscripts and books that Karan Singh's trust has preserved and opened to researchers. None of it functions as a seat of government anymore. It functions as an archive, a place where the outline of what the family once controlled can still be traced in furniture, in portraiture, in the weight of a golden throne nobody sits on anymore. Hari Singh's own historical reputation has shifted considerably since his death. For decades, the dominant narrative in both India and Pakistan treated him largely as an obstacle, a hesitant ruler whose indecision in 1947 helped produce one of the world's most stubborn territorial disputes. More recent historical reassessment has been kinder, noting that Hari Singh faced an impossible set of choices in a matter of weeks, navigating pressure from Nehru's government, threats from Pakistan, an active tribal invasion, and the demands of a population divided along religious lines, all without the benefit of hindsight later historians would have. Some scholars now argue that his instinct toward independence, however unworkable in practice, reflected a genuine attempt to protect a diverse kingdom from being carved up along the same lines that were, at that very moment, producing mass violence and displacement elsewhere across the subcontinent during partition. There is a particular kind of afterlife that follows a monarchy which falls without a single dramatic battle, and the Dogra dynasty's story fits the pattern almost exactly. Hari Singh did not go to the gallows. He did not die defending his palace. He signed a document under pressure, watched his authority get handed piece by piece to men who had once opposed him, and eventually retired to a rented existence far from the mountains that had made his family's fortune. That quiet, procedural unraveling meant there was no single moment of collapse for history to fixate on. No burning palace, no storming of gates, just a long erosion that took the better part of 2 decades to complete, from the tribal invasion of 1947 to the final abolition of the Sadar-i-Riyasat title in 1965. What makes the family's story different from a simple tale of royal decline is how completely Karan Singh managed to separate his own fate from that of the kingdom he never really got to rule. Where Kashmir itself has spent the better part of 8 decades as a militarized, disputed, and periodically violent territory, the man who would have been its hereditary Maharaja built a long, largely peaceful public career studying Sanskrit texts, chairing wildlife trusts, and representing his country abroad as a diplomat. His personal path bent toward reinvention and reconciliation with the new order. The territory his family once ruled followed almost the opposite path, becoming more contested and more heavily garrisoned with each passing decade, even as the family name gradually lost its power to shape any of it. Whether the accession Hari Singh signed under duress in 1947 was the right decision, the only decision available to him, or a mistake whose consequences are still being paid for by the people of Kashmir today, remains one of the most argued questions in South Asian history, debated in university seminars, in newspaper columns, and occasionally, still, on the floor of the Indian Parliament. Karan Singh spent much of his later life defending his father's choice as the only realistic option available under an active military invasion. Critics on multiple sides, in India, in Pakistan, and within Kashmir itself, have never fully accepted that framing, and the plebiscite that might have settled the question conclusively was never held by either country in nearly 80 years. In Jammu itself, the Dogra name still carries genuine cultural weight, distinct from politics entirely. Dogri, the language historically associated with the Jammu region and the ruling dynasty, was formally recognized as one of India's official scheduled languages in 2003, a status Dogra cultural organizations had campaigned for over decades. Statues and street names referencing Gulab Singh and his successors remain scattered across the city. Local festivals still draw on imagery associated with the old royal court. None of it comes with political authority attached anymore, but it points to something the family's political descendants have leaned into deliberately, a shift from ruling a kingdom to curating the memory of one, through museums and language advocacy rather than armies and accession treaties. Drive north from Jammu City today, past the cricket stadium and the new high-rises going up along the ring road, and Amar Mahal Palace still sits on its hillside overlooking the Tawi River, its French-inspired towers oddly out of place against the Himalayan foothills behind it. Inside, past the ticket counter and the gift shop selling postcards of the old Maharajas, the golden throne sits roped off under soft museum lighting, catching whatever sunlight comes through the tall windows. Tour guides mention, almost as an aside, that this was the seat from which an entire kingdom was once governed, back before a tribal invasion, a hurried signature, and 7 decades of unresolved politics turned that kingdom into 2 union territories and a line on a map nobody fully agrees on. The political chaos following the accession did not stop with the end of the monarchy. Sheikh Abdullah himself, the man whose rise had done as much as anyone to end Dogra rule, was dismissed as prime minister and arrested by the Indian government in August of 1953, accused of secretly negotiating an independent status for Kashmir behind New Delhi's back. He spent much of the next 2 decades in and out of detention before eventually returning to power as chief minister in 1975 under a negotiated accord with Indira Gandhi. Karan Singh, by then serving in Indira Gandhi's cabinet in Delhi, found himself on the opposite side of a political table from the very leader whose movement had once pushed his own father out of Kashmir altogether, a reversal neither man could have predicted in the tense weeks of October 1947. Nearly 80 years after Hari Singh signed the Instrument of Accession, the question he was forced to answer in a matter of days is still, in a sense, unresolved. Kashmir remains split between Indian and Pakistani administration, patrolled along a heavily militarized line of control that has barely moved since the ceasefire of 1949. Successive governments in both countries have offered their own justifications for holding what they hold, and generations of Kashmiris on both sides of that line have grown up under governments neither of their grandparents chose in any meaningful vote. The Dogra family that once claimed sovereignty over the whole territory by purchase, and then signed most of that sovereignty away under military pressure, has, through Karan Singh and now Vikramaditya Singh, ended up as just one more political voice inside a system with no room left for the kind of rule their ancestors once exercised. It is a strange kind of continuity for a dynasty, present in every generation, absent from every throne. Part of what makes the accession story so contested is that it had an internal chapter as well as an external one. In the Poonch region of the old princely state, local landholders and demobilized soldiers, many of them veterans of the Second World War, had already risen up against Dogra taxation and conscription policies months before the tribal invasion crossed the border, led by a local figure named Sardar Ibrahim Khan. That uprising, which began in the summer of 1947, predated the organized tribal incursion from the northwest and gave Pakistan a ready-made local government to install, once the fighting settled into a stalemate, the beginnings of what became Azad Kashmir. Hari Singh, in other words, was not only losing his kingdom to an outside invasion. Part of his own population, in at least one corner of the state, had already stopped recognizing his authority before a single tribal fighter crossed the frontier. Historians who study the end of princely India often point to Jammu and Kashmir as the case that took longest to actually conclude. Most of the roughly 565 princely states signed accession papers within months of independence in 1947 and were absorbed quietly into the new republic soon after. Kashmir's accession, by contrast, triggered a war that has never formally ended, a disputed border that both India and Pakistan still garrison heavily, and a constitutional relationship between the region and New Delhi that kept shifting for more than 7 decades after the ink dried. From special autonomous status in 1950, to the abolition of monarchy in 1952, to the renaming of offices in 1965, and finally to the removal of that autonomy altogether in 2019. Few other former kingdoms anywhere in the world took quite that long to fully stop being kingdoms. The Golden Throne in Amar Mahal will likely stay exactly where it is, roped off under museum lighting, for a long time to come. So, in all likelihood, will the disputed status of the territory it once represented. What has already changed, more completely than almost anyone in 1947 could have predicted, is the family itself. 3 generations removed now from absolute rule, still present in Jammu's political life, still occasionally photographed beside the same portraits that once hung in a palace where their word was law, and still, in their own quiet way, waiting to see how the story of the kingdom their ancestor bought for 75 lakh rupees finally gets written. Whether that story ends quietly in a museum wing, or simply carries on with another generation standing for election under a family name that once meant something entirely different, nobody in the family seems in any particular hurry to say. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.